Hello and welcome to Sonic Lab Special. We're very lucky to have flying in remotely from Berlin. We've got Dave Linnenbank from Bitwig. Bitwig Studios now just hit version 3, which is actually a really big upgrade for you guys. So what can we expect?
Yeah, well, the main feature in version 3, which is just out, is the grid, which is our take on a modular sound design environment. So it's for all your patching needs. We've been talking since version 1 about the modularity that's inside of Bitwig, and it's there, but now we've taken it to a sound design level. People would be familiar with modules, virtual patch cords, and all the rest.
Yeah, I remember actually when Bitwig first came out, there was a special version which showed some of this stuff sort of under the hood and the kind of almost the sort of object orientated audio programming and routing programming. So that's been there from like ages and ages. So you've now kind of brought that forward and front more public facing. Is that about right?
Exactly. The framework has always been there. One thing maybe it's unique about us, we've been spending almost as much time on our development tools as everything else so that we can create new instruments and manipulate them quickly. But making an interface that's friendly to the end user, to our friends at home, is a totally different undertaking.
Yeah.
So that all the jots and tittles are covered. So yeah, that's what this is. That's what the grid is. It's making it ready for the user.
Well, before we have a look, I mean, one thing I should also mention is Bitwig, since its inception, which was around about 5 years ago now, was parity in terms of features. When you push out a new version, it goes to Windows, Mac, and Linux, which is actually quite a unique. I think you guys
Correct.
were amongst the first, or if not the first guys to do that.
Yeah, timing wise, I don't know, but we are definitely still doing it. So every version that we put out, including our way of handling VST plugins and the crash prevention that we do, the crash protection that we've got, it's the same on any platform that you're working with. So yeah.
Okay, so let's have a look then, because this is release, isn't it? We should also point out this isn't kind of like it's not beta now; it's
Correct.
actually full release. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's out now. So anybody who had an active upgrade plan on the day it came out, they've got the full release version already. So the grid, like I said, it's basically a modular sound design environment, and we have two modules that make use of that environment, or two devices. One is the polygrid device, which is basically for building instruments of all kinds of varieties, and the other is the effects grid device, which is more thinking in terms of audio effects. So you have an audio bus in, an audio bus out, and then you create whatever it is that's going to go between the two so that you can make your own effects. We can look at both a little bit, but the polygrid is a little bit more intuitive to people to start by building a synth. So the whole point of the grid, it is for people who want to dive deep, but it also has sound content so that it's ready to go and make unique things, whether you're programming it or just tweaking it or just loading some of the presets. So if we were to open one or two of the presets and just get a sense of things, uh, I'll open a relatively simple one here where you're just seeing a few modules that are there and interacting, but you already get a rich result. So I've got a keyboard, I can play a few notes. So if we were trying to deconstruct this a little bit, I mean, the whole output chain of it is relatively simple, just an envelope, some gain, and the audio bus passing everything out. We're just hearing one sine wave with a little bit of shaping on it, but it happens to have a swarm of sine waves, a stack of 8 detuned sine waves doing phase modulation. So
Ah,
it's
right.
a very simple patch. You don't have to think about all that when you load the preset, but it's already got these layers to it, especially since it's working polyphonically, as you can see on the envelopes there, where there's multiple points of all the notes I'm
Great
playing.
animation, I have to say. Really nice to see. There's, you can see this what's going on. Nice clean interface. So I mean, it's kind of like a kind of, it's a building block for a synthesizer. So I mean, I mean, I hesitate to use the word Eurorack modules, but I suppose that is a parallel we could kind of draw upon, right?
Sure. I mean, modularity, it's been there as a concept forever, like everything. It comes in waves for when it's popular and not. Eurorack has definitely helped raise the name of modules and modularity and keep people interested. One nice thing, like the rest of Bitwig, if I were to take even just this simple patch here and say, oh, I've got this envelope, which I'm doing with my simple attack release that's playing each note. If I did want to output that signal to my Eurorack, uh, just from the I/O category here, I could scroll around and say, oh, I've got a simple little 1x1 CV out module. I'm going to drop it on that port. It's connected already. And now once I set up the audio I/O for what DC coupled port it would be going out, or AC if you're doing something weird like that,
Oh, you got
we've
the
already got
access
the
to it
C.
straight away, right? Oh, that's neat.
Exactly.
That's real neat. Yeah.
Yeah. So just trying to connect all the dots. I mean, there's also one aiming for CV pitch out if you're trying to do things that are in a pitch range so that you could double your internal and your external instruments. I mean, the nice thing about all the technology, you don't have to think of it exclusively. We try to play nice with everybody. So all of these inputs and outputs, if you've got hardware, it's going to connect fine. If you've got MPE sources for triggering the multi-dimensional MIDI on the way in, we support all that as well. Touchscreen, whatever it is, we're trying to stick with all the technology that's available, and just we're kind of the traffic cop in a way, and then some.
Nice way of putting it. So, I mean, that's a very simple module. I mean, how many are there? I mean, what can you go? How far can you go with this?
Yeah, with the grid currently, there's kind of three aspects to it, and the first is the library of modules because you can't build anything without the modules. Right now, there's 154
Crikey.
modules. There's a few, yeah. The second thing about it is the interactions. So if I were even just looking at this patch right now, and instead of the sine wave, we see we've got some settings and some things are set up about it. I could just go to the oscillator category and drag in, let's say something not too crazy, a triangle wave, hold it over the sine and let go.
So
And
replace.
it's a replace, but all the modulations and all the mappings and all the settings have been perfectly preserved. So
Ah,
we've put a whole lot of energy into the gestures so that it can be a quick sound design function instead of like I'm trying to manage where's my audio in, where's my audio out. It's like no. We're going to take care of all that as much as possible. We see you've got two oscillators. We're going to try to keep the settings relative and maintain them where it's appropriate. So you get to focus on the sound part.
that's really neat. I noticed there's some animated kind of info box on the left-hand side there. What's going on with that?
Well, the fun part over here, that's you're alluding to the third element of it. So we've got the modules, we've got the interactions, and the third part I would say is the interface portion of it that's particularly trying to bring an interactive level to dealing with the environment. So if I were to, let's just say, select the AR module, the attack release envelope, which is triggering with every note we play, and I'll zoom in over here into its inspector for a moment so we can see it a little bit better. You actually get a scope automatically of every signal coming in and out of the module.
Oh, that's nice.
So just by selecting any module here without having to pull in an oscilloscope, which we have, you can just automatically get a sense of, oh wait, is the gate signal coming in? Yes, it is. What's the output? So you just, at a glance, you can see everything there already without having to go into like a debug mentality. It's just ready for you. It's in a sense, it's almost like a haptic kind of thing. It's presenting what you need before you really need it, so it's always there. And by a similar token, if I were to look at, say, the oscillator here, another part that we've put a lot into for this element is the interactive help portion.
Oh,
So
yeah.
all of the documentation, for example, this triangle wave, and I'll just hold a couple notes down. If I just hit F1, which is the default mapping, it's pulling up a view, a help view, of this exact module I'm controlling. It's not, I can still change the parameters because it is the same module, along with full write-ups and information.
Oh,
So
wow,
all
neat.
of this,
Help in place.
yeah.
It's like solo in place. You've got HIP. There, you can have that for nothing.
Thank you, appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, and the point is, you don't need to try to memorize all these things. There are 154 modules, so the documentation is there when you need it instead of something to study another time. It just makes sense that it's part of the environment.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, looking at this, I mean, I've got a couple of questions. First one is, what's the
Mhm.
minimum system requirements? Because I know that I'm a big fan of Raspberry Pis, and
Mhm.
the Pi 4 has just come out, which, as we know, this will
Mhm.
run on Linux. Is there enough power in that to be able to run something like this? I mean, is there a minimum specification, or it's probably not something that you've tried it
It
on
it
yet?
it kind of scales. I mean, one thing particularly about the grid and some other parts of Bitwig that we've worked on a lot lately is that all of these modules that are here, when you open it up on your system, it's actually saying, okay, what kind of processor are you using? Let's pick the preferred version of doing math on that processor, and it compiles the modules when you open the program. So that
Oh
it can
wow!
actually say, "Oh, you like it a little bit this way, then we can do a lot more signal processing if we go your preferred path as opposed to another one." So that's something we've put a lot of effort into. It's hard to say exact minimums
Hmm.
because it is adaptive like this. Um,
But
but
I
I
mean, I guess
was
because it's
yeah.
adaptive, it will work. It's just to how much of it you can use, I suppose, is the at
Exact.
once.
Well, I mean, I gave we were at Super Booth a few months ago, and as part of a demonstration there, my modern laptop got very sad, so we were running it off of a 2012 MacBook Air, tiny one, 11-inch, and it was running everything in the grid fine for what we needed. So, um, I haven't really seen processors that are aged out yet. Let's put it that way.
Wow. Okay. So here's a question: Have you got a patch
Mhm.
in there that's kind of a bit over the top? That's got kind of a lot of stuff going? Because obviously, what we're looking at the moment is very simple and straightforward. What happens if you get a much
Sure.
larger kind of topography to deal with? Is there a way to manage that? Because that's you've only got so much screen real estate.
Well, that's a good question. You can see down in this kind of preview area that we've got a bunch of things going already. It's kind of giving you a sense of the topology of the patch down in the area itself. So let's just go ahead. I think he had a big crazy one. That looks fairly big and crazy, and it's chirping already without me playing anything. Um,
So it's a sort of
so,
generative type thing. Okay. Oh right.
yeah,
Oh
so
my.
this area here, it's not just showing the pretty jelly beans, as I call them sometimes. It's actually hinting at what all of the modules are inside of there. And if I did want to hide some of the elements around, I can get rid of the browser here. I could get rid of the inspector for now. The grid interface itself is even independently zoomable. So I could zoom it out separately if I'm oh, if I'm really just trying to get as much on the screen as possible, or just hide
Wow.
this bottom interface as well.
Wow.
So yeah, and you can see as part of what's in here with this preset, we've encouraged people, when appropriate, to go ahead and put a whole bunch of notes in there when it
Right. So
helps
you can
to
annotate.
decode. Yeah, yeah, there's a comment module, there's a big title module. You can label things and rename modules themselves. Yeah, it's like comments in code. I mean, if you're a good boy or
You
girl,
can,
you will leave them behind and you can see what you did later.
So does that mean that are we getting into elements of GUI design here, or is it really just a sort of more functional aspect? So it looks like what it looks like, but you can't then reskin it or do anything kind of too fancy outside of that.
Uh, Not necessarily inside of here. No, I mean there is still, like we've always had. If I were to go ahead and say, well, I would just like to add a new controller interface page. This whole remote
Ah, okay.
control section, it works the same as all of our other devices. So if I look here and I say, oh well, I really want the attenuate knob over here and the quantize knob over here, and now whenever I connect my regular controller, my 8 knobs are going to
So the
map to these
macro, yeah, you
already.
can macro. Wow, this is really powerful. I mean, looking at this, it's almost easy to forget that we are talking about a DAW here. It's not just a synth program, right?
There's been confusion from time to time when I talk to people. It's like, Bitwig, is it a DAW or is it a sound design environment? And the reason that there's confusion is we've got modulators across the whole place before we even got into the grid. I mean, you can load an LFO and apply it to a plugin. You can do whatever you want. So the answer might be even more murky now, but it essentially is a sound design environment masquerading as a DAW, or vice versa. I mean, we do both, so it's a bit unique in that regard.
And so, therefore, can you use elements in the grid, so the LFOs and whatnot, to map to parameters in the sort of the rest of the Bitwig program, or are they self-contained?
Sure.
Those sort of. Oh,
No, no, no. I mean, like we were looking at with the remote controls, all of the modulators and maybe maybe I'll load something slightly different that is not singing so constantly. Here's a nice fun little patch. If I go ahead. So I've got a few LFOs going on here. This is a fun little patch. It's a monophonic synthesizer, but it's delaying one of its lines and running everything through our regular arpeggiator device. So it sounds more than mono, because if I hold down multiple notes.
Right. Okay.
So sometimes things don't always work with categories so well, but I've got some LFOs here that are making the change happen. You can see the triangle swaying back and forth under the control of this LFO. So if I were to go ahead and let's just do something obvious, if I add an audio effect as part of this preset, maybe, well, let's just be very obvious. Let's just do like a bit crusher kind of thing. I could then say, I would also like that same LFO that is controlling up here to modulate the quantize level.
Oh, right. Okay.
Or if it's your favorite VST plugin, it would be exactly the same deal. You could take these control sources.
That's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. So this is synth stuff, right? I mean, I noticed there are at least 3 grid. There's the grid, there's polygrid, and there's effects grid. So there's more to the grid.
Sure.
As well.
Yeah, we've only touched polygrid so far, which is the instrument version. The other device right now is effects grid, which would let you do audio processing as well. So let's pretend we weren't so fond of that bit crusher that we were using just then. We could make our own with effects grid, and there are certain advantages. So I'm going to go ahead and add another device. I'm going to ask for an effects grid, which by default, that's your patch.
In and out. Right.
It's a patch cord. Yeah. Whatever comes in goes out. So we're back to our clean, arpeggiated, duophonic kind of sound here. So if I were to take this and say I want to build a bit sample rate reducer, then I'll just do a simple one real quick. If I go over to the level category, we'll find sample and hold, a module that a lot of modular folks would be familiar with. It just takes the incoming signal, and whenever the trigger is sufficient on the other side, it says, oh, give me the new value, update the new value. So it essentially lets us create a clock in this case. So now I'm going to take something like an oscillator. Well, I'll use a literal oscillator because it's easier to look at and understand. Let's just throw a sawtooth down here. He is our clock. And now I'm going to throw the frequency very high. And because then if we go ahead and reduce the frequency, you start getting sample rate reduction.
Ah, okay. Interesting. So that's just slicing. That's just effectively slicing the audio up into into smaller and smaller chunks, so you get less bits. Effectively, yeah. Right. Okay.
Well, not the bit, the sample rate part. I might have said that wrong.
Yeah.
So
okay.
exactly. Now only so often. Yeah, and the nice thing here, since it's effects grid is actually the way Bitwig has always worked. The notes go into the instrument, but they also pass on to the effects grid. So we could use them here as a parameter as well. I didn't turn off keyboard tracking. This nice little pre-chord icon is still keyboard tracking. So now if I were to play different notes on the keyboard, it's going to relatively raise or lower the sample rate. So a much more, before we even get into velocity or pressure, I mean, you've already got something that's responding in a different sort of way.
Okay, right. I mean, it's kind of, I'm feeling the mushroom cloud growing on the top of my head, ready to blow out the top. I mean, I guess the thing is I mean, this is there is an aspect of option paralysis. If you want to go that way, you can do all of this yourself. But presumably, do the 140 odd modules, are they the same for the effects grid and the polygrid? So that they work
exactly the same.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, the entire environment, the gestures and the interfaces and the modules, they're exactly the same in both places. The only difference, like in this case, you can see the value of having notes coming into effects grid, which can be unique and nice. So there's really only one parameter difference, which basically lets me over in the inspector say, maybe I want a different track to be the note source. If this was just processing regular audio coming through, you don't have notes in an audio
Yeah,
track.
okay, but you can
So
route it for
I
somewhere
could just
else.
say, yeah, I'm on stage. Let me enable this one controller, and now he's going to be helping my effects processor.
Wow. Okay. So you bring up the notion of stage, which kind of generates the concept of
Mm,
kind of real time performance. I mean, what's this like on a
mm,
CPU here? I mean, on your average, I mean, we're not talking. You know, we'd take a sort of average, say maybe a year old MacBook, which is still really powerful. I mean, what can we
mm.
expect in terms of CPU sort of performance out of that?
Sure. Well, like I said, we've already tried to optimize things a great deal. That was a big part of our development time early on, just trying to get it optimized for different processors. Um, I, of all the different tests we've done, it's honestly, I haven't we haven't flatlined it yet, aside from
Right.
finding a bug and fixing it in the alpha process. So, uh, in on these different computers, I mean, you could ask for 20 voices, and I want to stack them so each voice is doubled and set differently, and the results are pretty reasonable. But like any modular environment, it really is up to the user at a certain point. If
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Absolutely.
decide you need, 30 anti-aliasing oscillators, well, it's, you should have a conversation with your processor about that. But it works generally well.
So this is, I mean, I want to get this straight. I mean, Bitwig
Hmm.
Studio 3, that's it. You haven't got different flavors. You just kind of go, you buy
No.
into the Bitwig thing, and that's what you're getting. You're getting all of this, right?
Yeah, yeah. Once if you've bought Bitwig Studio, then everything is included in it. The grid is just the newest aspect of it, but it's not a separate purchase. It's not some add-on. Once you've paid and you've got an upgrade plan, whatever comes out, it's in your account.
So the full version of Bitwig Studio 3 is 399. So I buy
Hmm.
that, and there's also upgrade plans. I'm not quite totally clear on how that works. Perhaps you could just explain that part to me.
Sure. Well, if you were a new customer altogether and you paid 399 the normal price in US dollars for Bitwig Studio, you do get whatever the current version is today, but you also get all of our major updates that occur for the next 12 months. So from the day you activate your license, if that means 3.1, 3.2, if these come out in the next year, you get those as well. Your license is permanent, so if 3.2 comes out and then your license plan expires, any 3.2 version is going to work for you forever. And then you could pay about 170 US dollars for another 12 months of the updates that we do. So it's a perpetual license that happens to include the next 12 months of development that we do,
Ah,
whether
okay.
it's however big or small it is. If version 4 came out in the next 12 months, then that would be included.
Ah, right. Or you could just hold where you are and say, right, I'm going to not buy an upgrade plan until version 4 or version 5 or whatever version I want. But I guess the point is if
Mm.
people go for the kind of upgrade plans, it means that your continual development of the software, which I mean, I should also point out, you get 3 installs, right? So you could put that on Mac, PC, and Linux if you wanted. So you could have 3 platforms covered with one
Sure.
Bitwig purchase, right? Okay.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so I mean, we've seen the sort of basics of the grid. I presume there's a whole bunch of patches in there as well. Have you got something in there that you can show us that really is pushing the boundaries a bit?
Sure. There's 200 plus presets that are part of what came with version 3, with more on the way. But right now, so if I go ahead, why don't I just add another? Let's try something fairly non-traditional for a moment. This is a pretty small looking, uh, kind of manageable patch. But the whole idea here is once you understand where the signals are coming from, you're free to use them how you want. So what this patch is actually doing is using the keyboard not as normal notes, but as different harmonics. It's actually reproducing an instrument theremin made 100 years ago that some people call the first drum machine, the rhythmicon. So then if I were to add some, I'm just playing a C, a C sharp, and a D sharp. But what you're getting are all the notes and the rhythmic intervals that are there. So if I were to combine something different and strange,
Oh, that's interesting.
so just the idea that once it's like sound design, you start with some concept and then you end up somewhere different. So if I were to free this up a little bit and say, well, maybe each note that I play should restart the tempo period instead of being on a fixed grid. So now I've got regular patterns, but they can kind of spread out. Maybe bend the curve itself.
Oh, nice.
Everybody likes a sharp nine.
That's
But
right.
yeah,
Okay,
so
yeah. So
just
that's kind of unusual. That's non-traditional, I would say. Yeah.
polygrid could mean a generative patch. It could mean a stack of droning things. It could mean an instrument that
Is there a
plays.
sample player in there as well? So could you kind of generate? Could you trigger kicks and snares and stuff like that if you want? Yeah.
Oh, sure. Actually, of all the modules in here, we didn't really try to recreate our full devices, but the closest exception to that rule is the sampler from our 2.4 update last year that now has wavetable modes and everything else. Essentially, our full sampler is in a module.
Right.
So if you were to go ahead and grab any kind of audio or sample content and drop it in there, it's a fully functioning module already. Even if you had a vast multi-sample or something you've already made, you can load it into this module and then either play it with notes or wire it with control
Is it possible
signals.
to automate individual parameters from within Polygrid as well?
Well, from the DAW, sure. I mean, just as we saw with the remote controls that can be added easily, if I were to go ahead and try to add modulation under Polygrid, every module is actually just another source of parameters. So that entire sample module, every parameter is exposed here for drawing automation immediately. So
Wow. Wow. Okay.
thank you.
Mind officially blown. So we should also reiterate that Bitwig 3 Studio 3 is available right now. It's download. It's you don't do airboxes and stuff, do you? It's a download only, isn't it?
It's in some stores, but it's a download only. And since it's a final release now, since it's out in the world, you can download it and try it in demo mode today. Yep.
I should all point out again. I know I've said this already. It's parity across all platforms, so you could build something on a Mac and open the same patch or document in your Linux version or your Windows version, right? Just to reiterate that.
Exactly. If you save a session here or a project here, it would open in what if you're on Mac, it would open in PC, it would open on Linux. As long as you're using the internal devices,
Yeah.
we don't know what plugins support what platform, but all of these things would work across the different platforms, whether you're doing it yourself or you build something in the grid and send a session or a preset file to a friend or collaborator. It would work just as well there. It's that easy to share patches.
Fantastic. Dave, thank you so much for coming in and showing us. That's been absolutely fascinating.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Nick. I appreciate it.